love Ted. He's just like, you're short. Yeah. Yeah.
You're too ugly.
Yes. Yeah.
He's cuter than me, so. We are rolling. You don't need to wait for me to start or anything. When you're ready. All right, thank you.
Hey, Dave, show me your hands. You're not carrying anything?
Of course not.
Okay.
You can tell anyways, you're blinded by the light.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that when I was up here.
Okay, everyone, take one, pass it down.
Yeah. Definite tactical disadvantage.
All right, what the hell? It's supposed to be. All right, so this is Matt Neely. He's going to give a talk that he wasn't originally scheduled to give, so he gets bonus points for being a trooper and our alternate, which is great. He was the only alternate left in the bucket, so we had no choice but to go with him, really.
It's an honor.
Yeah, we plan to view it that way. Anyone have an RFID-enabled passport on them? The little. No one does?
Take it out so we can skim it.
Because I had one of these little fancy RFID wallet things that protect your passport.
With the Shmoocon logo.
With the Shmoocon logos. Okay, there you go. You're the first person to actually pony up in the Mitchell owning one. So sure, you can have yourself a Shmoocon branded RFID proof wallet. These are. Just throw it. We did a reasonable amount of work to attempt to validate the testing on it, and there's a bunch of them that are on the market, and some of them really suck and don't really deal with the frequencies that they need to deal with. These ones came the closest to having reasonable attenuation at the frequencies that the passport is at. So, we can give you more information on that later if you're so interested. But this is, hey, that was feedback. This is the first of a couple of talks that deal with RF that we have scattered around today. So Shmoocon used to kind of have a bit of a history of being really wireless happy, and I think the last couple of years that went out of vogue, but for some reason this year we had a whole bunch of talks get submitted that were really good that involved various Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, general RF kind of things. So I'm really excited about watching this, but unfortunately I have to go to work. So good luck and party on.
Thank you.
Thought you said yesterday you didn't. It's funny how you don't have a job and you still have shit to do.
Isn't it great running a con?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so today we're going to talk about radio reconnaissance and penetration testing, aka all your RF are belong to us. A little background on myself. I'm Matt Neely, also known in the community as Zamboni. I'm the manager of the profiling team at SecureState, which is a consulting company in Cleveland, Ohio that basically serves national and international clients. My areas of expertise are wireless, penetration testing, that's both physical and logical penetration testing, physical security, security convergence, which is basically placing physical security devices onto the corporate network and all the fun and problems that can cause, and incident response. Prior to coming to SecureState, did a lot of things. The big thing that comes into play here is I formed and ran the TSCM team for a Fortune 200 company. And basically TSCM are the bug sweep folks. We would travel with executives, go into an area before executives go into it, sweep it for transmitters, sweep it for hidden recording devices, and that type of thing. Fun job, got to use hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of RF equipment, high-end spectrum analyzers, all sorts of fun stuff. So that's where I learned some of the techniques here that I'll be discussing. Outside of work, I'm the co-host of the Security Justice podcast with Tom and Dave are the other hosts here. And I've also been an amateur radio operator for about 20 years. So that was kind of one of the ways I got into radio, learned some of these techniques, get some of these cool toys. And final little bit about myself. The radio up there is the Fisher-Price Sky Talker walkie-talkie, which is the first radio that I hacked when I was in about middle school. I took my pair and reprogrammed them to basically align them to work on a different frequency so that me and my friends could talk over them without having everyone else easily listen in. So my first hack, that radio has a special place in my heart. Okay. Here's a picture of basically the RF spectrum as managed by the FCC in the US. It goes from 3 kilohertz up to 300 gigahertz. Lots of range, all the different colors represent different services, but there's a lot of spectrum out there. During a normal penetration test, most people just look at 2.4 gigahertz that covers stuff like 802.11a, G, some N, and possibly Bluetooth. Some people go up to 5.8 and they look at things like, they look at things like 802.11a there and part of N as well. But those are pretty small slivers of the spectrum. So the big question is, on your pen tests, what else are you missing? Because there's all sorts of other things out there. There are guard frequencies. If the site you're looking at has a guard force, most likely they have handheld radios, and they transmit over them. You can learn all sorts of valuable information by listening to them. Cordless phones. Lots of places use cordless phones for convenience sake. Again, usually you'll find interesting information transmitted over them. Headsets work on the cordless phone route. I've also generally found that the headsets that are given out to either people that are executives, executive assistants, or people at the help desk. And those are all really juicy targets in terms of the type of information they release. You can usually learn some very interesting things while listening in on them. And a final thing are security cameras. Some places do use wireless security cameras, usually in the 2.4 range. So if you can monitor those, depending on where they're placed, they can provide you with valuable information about your target. In most cases, they're just watching some far end of the parking lot because they didn't want to run coax out there. But I have had places where they have deployed wireless across the inside of their facility. In that case, that can really help with footprinting the inside of a facility for a physical pen test or even figuring out what areas have camera coverage. So another valuable area to look at. But to sum this all up, I has your frequencies, I can phone you. The jokes don't really get any better. But yeah, just to warn you right now. Sitting there twittering about, making lolcats for my talk. It should have been a warning to folks. A couple of legal notes first. The first big one is I'm not a lawyer, so nothing I'm saying here is actually legal advice, should be taken as legal advice. If you want to do these types of activities, I'd recommend that your corporate lawyer definitely review the local laws that apply and make sure you're not breaking any laws. The first big law to be aware of are wiretap laws. I'll be talking about how to monitor cordless phones and wireless headsets that could be hooked up to phone lines. Monitoring those, depending on how they're set up, could be a violation of state and federal and local wiretap laws. So be sure you're familiar with those laws and don't break them. Additionally, if you decide to record conversations, make sure that you know the recording rules for your state. Some states require both parties to consent to recording. Other states require just a single party to consent to the recording. If you're in a state that requires dual consent and you have an external party phone into a phone call you're listening to, how do you know that's an external party? They probably can't give consent. Basically, stay on the right side of the law. Next, a couple of states have laws that limit where you can take scanners, basically radios, that can receive things like police, fire, and type of stuff. Know those laws for your state and the area is going to be operating in, so again, you don't violate them. New York City, Kentucky are two ones I know that have some pretty strict rules on scanner use. As a side note, a lot of those rules can be bypassed if you're an amateur radio operator, because the Supreme Court ruled that it's in the national security's interest, or in the nation's interest, to have amateur radio operators always have access to their equipment for emergency response. So usually amateur radio operators can carry their equipment into any state. But you don't really want to be sitting there arguing with a Kentucky State Trooper that I'm an amateur radio operator as he takes a couple $1,000s worth of gear away from you. They need to go through a whole legal process to get it back. So even though you might be on the right side of the law there, know it for the state and be able to deal with it. And a final note on this, in most states, it's completely legal to monitor anything on the radio waves as long as it's not in a protected category, which includes things like telephone calls, pager traffic, and stuff like that. So it's completely legal to listen to police, fire, business radios, personal guards, all that sort of stuff. Again, in most states, check with your lawyer to make sure the states you're operating in still applies to. Still not a lawyer. Additional activities to avoid: jamming transmission, decoding pager traffic, and illegally transmitting. And jamming transmissions is one where basically, unless you're working for the federal government, they probably cannot give you permission to jam a transmission. Even if a company owns that transmission, owns the frequency you're transmitting on, and you're only going to be jamming it on their property, they don't own the RF on their property. That's owned by the FCC. So if you have a client that's a business that says, well, we want to see how you can jam our 802.11. Or we want to see how you can jam, we have a alarm system with a cell phone link. We want to see if you can jam that. They can't give you permission to do that in most cases. That really falls down to the FCC. So again, if a client wants that, have your legal team review it to make sure, again, you're on the right side of the law. So now I got that boring stuff out of the way. Let's get into the fun stuff. Basically, first step, you have a target. You're going to want to profile them, figure out what sort of frequencies are coming out of the site, what sort of radios there are, so you can monitor them and gather up juicy information. There are generally 2 steps I take when profiling a site. One is off-site profiling. And basically, the goal of this is to determine as much information about the target as you can before you arrive on site. Key things to know, can you figure out they use in-house guard services or outsourced guard services? If they use outsourced guard services, then you're going to want to figure out what sort of frequencies and equipment the outsourced guard services use. If they use in-house guard services, then you're going to want to figure out what the in-house guard services use. But knowing if they're in-house or outsourced, we'll be able to help you figure out what sort of searches you should do to try to narrow down what frequencies are in use. Also, if you can find out what frequencies are licensed to use by searching the FCC database, or if you can figure out the make and model equipment they use, that can also help you figure out what frequency ranges to look at. So the first step that I usually do, I ask the Oracle, almighty Google. Search for things like, company name, scanner, all that type of stuff. You can sometimes turn up forum posts and other sites that people have said, hey, I was at X and I found the security frequency for it. This is especially easy to do for any sort of public venues or state government, local government, that type of thing. Those frequencies are fairly easy to find. If you're looking at what sort of frequencies does Bank X's security force use, unless it's a big bank, you probably won't find that from searching online. In that case, the next place that I look is I start looking at press releases from major radio manufacturers and the resellers in the area. Because if company X puts in a whole brand new radio system, a lot of times these manufacturers will put out a press statement about it saying, hey, look how great we are. We just installed this great radio system at this company. From that information, you can pull out what sort of frequencies they could operate on, if they support encryption, trunking, all sorts of other information. Again, this is stuff that will help you along. Yeah?
Yeah, what about vendor-specific or certain vendors, target by default certain frequency ranges? Like, so if you knew that someone's using this vendor of headset, can you use that to at least gauge the range they're in?
Yeah, and the question was if you have a certain vendor of product, can you use that to determine what frequency range they could operate in? And yes, you can. And a lot of that can be done by going to the vendor's website. I'll be covering some of that later on. Also, for people that are frantically noting down stuff, these slides will be available later. So no need to copy down every single thing on here. Additionally, looking for press releases from outsourced guard companies are a great way to figure out if the company has outsourced their guard force as well. Here are some great online resources. Radio Reference is one of my favorite sites. They have a lot of content for free. A paid year subscription, I think, is $30, and that allows you to do some kind of custom queries of their database, which I haven't found super useful, but it allows you to print out the information in PDF format, which again is sort of useful. But the free information on site's wonderful. The last 2 sites are sites that contain the FCC data. Every single company that has a license to transmit on frequency has to register with the FCC. So if you can search the FCC database for a company name, you can find out what frequencies are registered to use. The national radio data, I've actually never used them, but they were the cheapest one I found for $30. Percom Corp, I've used in the past, but they recently switched from a fixed paid model to a call us for a custom quote paid model, which makes me think that it's bloody expensive. But one of the really nice things about the Percom Corp data is inside of their database, they also have the latitude and longitude of where the transmitter that is licensed is located. So if you know the physical location of your target site, you can type in the latitude and longitude of that into their search engine and say, show me all transmitters within 5 miles. And you then get all the registered transmitters within 5 miles. It's a great way to footprint for a site. Conversely, if you're doing any sort of TSCM work, being able to figure out what frequencies are active in the area so you can eliminate them when looking for bugs and other hidden transmitters. Other great resource for that, do a little pre-intelligence, figure out what's transmitting the area so you have an idea what are friendly and hostile signals. Example of off-site profiling, before I came here, just a quick search for Marriott Wardman Park scanner frequency and found it in the radio reference database. Coded up last night on my handy little Yaesu VX5R and been listening to security ever since then. So you can easily pick out information like that with just a simple Google search. Next up, on-site profiling. So what sort of things can you do once you get on-site to then figure out the frequencies? First thing that I really like are things called frequency counters. And these are basically radios that have a really loose weak end or front end, and will look for the strongest signal and lock onto that. The key here is they lock onto what are called near-field signals. So if you're talking about a handheld, you're pretty much going to lock onto the closest handheld that's probably within a room this size, pretty short range. For mobiles and base stations, you get a little bit more range, pretty much line of sight. But they're a great way to quickly identify what frequencies are transmitting. The biggest problem with them is in frequency-rich urban areas. They tend to have a lot of interference that can mess up the ability for the frequency counter to lock on to a channel. And specifically, if you're near an FM transmitter, TV transmitter, or pager station, usually those will overpower it, so the frequency counter will not work. You can get filters to filter out that traffic, but it gets to be kind of a pain in the ass. For frequency counters, the device I highly recommend is this little guy here called the Optoelectric Scout. Most frequency counters only record at best one frequency at a time. So the first frequency it sees, it locks onto. This guy actually has a memory that can record up to 400 frequencies it sees and how many times it sees each frequency. So one of my favorite things to do whenever I'm profiling a site, if it's a public site I can walk through, like a casino, convention center, something like that, is I'll take this guy, I'll turn it on, put it underneath my jacket, and just wander around the facility. Every single time someone transmits, gets a blip on here, and basically stores up the memory. Go back out to the car, wherever our staging station is, look through all the frequencies that are stored, and see, okay, well, we have 20 hits on this frequency, 5 hits on this frequency, and so on. It's a great way to figure out what is actually transmitting in the area. It also has a radio or a computer out on it, which is the CIV format, which is used by ICOM. So you can easily hook it up, download it into a database, and then do some pretty easy manipulation on it. You can also, if you want to tie it into other databases, do some cross-referencing depending on how snazzy you want to get. But a great tool, highly recommended if you do decide to get into this. They run, I think they're like $360, but you can get them on eBay for less. One note, if you get them on eBay, I guarantee the battery will not be working. But the battery's really easy to fix. It's just a 4-pack of AAA batteries, cut the lead, solder in a new set of rechargeables. But the front end on these radios is really, really sensitive. And if the front end's blown, the radio is basically useless. And a lot of people blow the front ends because they're very sensitive, and if you get them too close to a strong transmitter, it'll blow the front end. So if it's still receiving frequencies, fine, but the batteries are dead, go ahead and buy it. It can easily be fixed. If it's not receiving frequencies, you're just buying a nice little brick. Next up, basically visual reconnaissance of the site. In this phase, try to identify the make and model of the radios, note the length of the antennas, because depending on how long an antenna is, it can give you a clue about what frequency ranges the radio could be operating in. Additionally, look for things like, do they use a mix of radios, or do they all use the same radio? If they use a mix of radios, they probably aren't using any sort of advanced features like trunking or encryption or even anything digital, because generally, despite the fact that all those are standards, like most standards, they tend not to work well between manufacturers. So that can give you an idea. If they're using a mix of radios, then they're probably not doing anything super fancy. And basically use the information above to determine the frequency range they can operate in, what sort of features they have. If they're Motorola radios they're using, the best resource on the lab for this is a place called batlabs.com. These guys have an amazing wealth of information on Motorola radios, everything from programming cables up to the specs. Amazing place to go for Motorola radios, and luckily Motorola radios are probably the most common radio you're going to run into in the field for any sort of guard force. For other sorts of radios, Vertex, ICOM are two big ones you'll run into. I'm blanking on another one. But go to the manufacturer site, look for the specs on that radio. To figure out what sort of radio it is, you can do a Google search on Vertex radios and start looking at the pictures to see what picture looks like the radio you saw. In this stage, having a camera is very helpful, so you can actually not need to just memorize it, do some comparisons, go to the sites, pull down the technical docs, see what the radio can operate on. Conversely, with like headsets and stuff, there are certain predefined ranges that most headsets fall into. Once you see certain headsets manufacturers, they tend to follow certain patterns, but you can also just scan those ranges looking for headsets as well. Final step of on-site profiling, if you haven't been able to find anything, is you actually just start searching common frequency ranges. This is a very manual step, very labor-intensive, can take a lot of time. So usually save it for last. First, look for common frequencies such as FSRS, GMRS, and dot frequencies. These are predefined frequencies that are used by basically a lot of off-the-shelf radios. Some are designed for business use, some are designed for family use. FSRS is just designed for family use, but you'll see a ton of shops using them. Search through those range, see what you can hear. Other option is to go through common frequency ranges. Again, here are some common ones for businesses, because generally finding frequencies used by local governments, if your target's a local government, is pretty easy to do. And then the area at the bottom are the frequencies used by cordless phones and cordless headsets. The most are analog cordless phones and cordless headsets, I'll specify. The most common range you'll find in use is 900 megahertz. Occasionally you'll find some in the 2.4 gigahertz range. Most of those are digital. Surprisingly, I occasionally find some that are analog. And if you have one of those on a site that's wireless, their wireless will be destroyed because it uses a really wide chunk of the spectrum. And even really old frequencies, like the 43 megahertz frequencies, which are the really old cordless phones, like the big antenna you have to pull out, I've actually found those in use at a client site. There was one client site where I was doing a review of their setup and asked, cordless phones and cordless headsets. Like, oh yeah, we have a cordless phone used at the data center. Okay, can I see it? They bring it in, and it's this old unit, 43 megahertz. It's like, well, you should really think about replacing this. What do you use it for? Like, oh, we don't use it that often. It's just, if a server crashes, we have certain, high-sensitive devices, like our crypto accelerators and all of our FIPS hardware, which we can't actually remote into. So when we talk to the vendor on the phone, we don't want to bring a phone in there, so we just used a cordless phone. So I'm like, so let me get this straight. The FIPS certified crypto hardware you're using to protect your ATM transactions, when you call into tech support, you do it over a clear channel that anyone can listen to. Might want to change that. So you'll still find it in use because it's one of those things that people, oh, we got it 10 years ago, still works, great. So next, now that we know how to find these frequencies, let's go over some of the hardware requirements. And something to note with all the parts of the talk, there's only so much to be covered in an hour, especially with some of the technical details. So I'll be doing a series of blog posts that will cover in excruciating detail how to select hardware, what features to look for, how to go through all the profiling steps in great detail, provide all the tools and techniques I use through future blog posts. So that'll be something that you can follow up on later if you want more detail on specific areas. First thing with selecting a scanner, which is basically a radio that can receive a variety of frequencies, you do not need a fancy or expensive radio to gather valuable data. This guy here is a Pro 39, really old radio. I got it when I was in high school, pretty sure. This will still work just fine for most of the stuff I'm going to be covering. If your target's using trunked radio systems or any sort of digital, then it's not going to work. But frankly, most businesses don't use those fancy features. So this will work fine. It's just an old radio. It's not PC programmable, so you're going to spend a lot of time pushing a lot of buttons to program stuff in, but it'll work. And you can go down, you can pick up radios like this at a pawn shop for cheap, especially if your town recently converted over to a digital police dispatch system. You'll find that the pawn shops are flooded with old scanners because most of the people can't use them to listen to police anymore. So you can go with an inexpensive used scanner, still get a lot of value out of it. But what are some of the features that we're going to look for? First, you're wanting a triple conversion radio. And basically, there are dual conversion, triple conversion, even some quadruple conversion radios. Basically, the more times it goes through conversion, the less likely there'll be interference, birdies, and other type of things. It basically is a higher quality radio. Will let you listen to frequencies. You receive less interference, it'll be more sensitive radio, better quality. And today, there's really no reason to get anything other than a triple conversion radio. If you're buying a used radio, figure out if it's a dual conversion or triple conversion. Usually, you can find triple conversion radios, again, on the used market for well under $100, probably in the $50 range. Next, you want a radio that can receive up to 900 megahertz, because that's where a lot of the juicy targets are, like cordless headsets and those type of things you're going to want to be able to monitor. So make sure it at least has those two features when looking for a scanner. Nice to have features, alphanumeric memory. If your scanner has 200 frequent channels on it and you're trying to remember what is channel 192, what's channel 1, alphanumeric, again, just a nice little thing to have so you can look at it and actually have some text explaining what you're listening to. PC programmable, another nice feature. Again, if you have a radio that's 200 channels, programming in 200 frequencies is a pain in the ass. But if you can plug it into a PC, load the frequencies into it, it can go a lot faster. You can also have predefined programming for all my radios that will do things depending on the geographic area, what I'm targeting, if I'm looking for headsets, guard frequencies, other things like that. So once I profile the target, I can just load in the common frequencies for the type of data I'm trying to intercept. Trunk tracking and be able to decode APCO 25. These are basically standards that are used by trunk radio systems. What a trunk radio system is kind of beyond this talk. Most corporations still aren't using trunk radio systems. If you start to see some larger ones are, the ones that are really aren't using APCO 25 or any sort of digital. So this really comes into play if you're dealing with a very, very large corporation, multinational size corporation, or a government entity. Discriminator out is basically the ability to output the audio from a scanner before it gets cleaned up for the human ear to see here. And this can be handy for decoding data traffic, because when you send the signal through a series of filters to filter it out so it's good for the human ear to hear, you can actually filter out a lot of data. So if you want to be able to decode data, having a scanner with a discriminator out or the ability to add a discriminator out easily is very handy. And the final feature, look for something PC controllable. Could be handy. Personally, I don't really see too much use for it, but again, nice feature to have. Other features that are more specialized features that probably don't need, but if you have the money, by all means go for it. Is one, able to receive frequencies over 1.8 gigahertz. Basically, anything above that's probably going to be digital, so unless you have specialized equipment, you're not going to be able to receive it. The second is an IF out, which is basically will output the radio spectrum at 10.4 megahertz and can be helpful for hooking up to things like spectrum analyzers, also video converters. So if your client is using video, you can hook the IF out up to a video converter and then look at the video on a screen. Helpful feature to have, but definitely a specialized item that you generally won't use. So what would I recommend if you want to go out today and purchase a scanner to do this? Here are three models. ARO 8200, kind of top-of-the-line handheld in the area of pretty much just monitoring, not monitoring trunked or digital signals. That's one thing this is not a capability to do. But it has a very, very wide receive range, a very solid receiver. Also has a serial port on it, very easy to program it for use. So it's you basically hook up to a computer, very simple AT set. I'm not a programmer, and I've written programs to control it. Very simple. Next two are Bearcats, which are kind of the big consumer brand. The middle one is the 396, and can receive trunking and digital. Nice features to have, probably run into main businesses right now, but if you have the money to spend, you might as well get the top end, so you have the features for when they're using it in the future. Then the low end is the SC230. Should be noted, it's the official scanner of NASCAR. So that's a big plus. And basically, this is the cheapest scanner that Bearcat sells that receives 900 megahertz range, and that's triple conversion. So it'd be kind of the minimum I recommend for getting into it. And if you have absolutely unlimited budget, go for the ICOM 9500. Quadruple conversion, super sensitive, has built into it a spectrum analyzer. It actually has the features needed to be able to decode video right in it. Also, if you want to do any sort of data decoding, it actually has the FSK, basically the modem hardware built into it to start decoding signals, like weather faxes, pagers, stuff like that. And the downside is it's $14,000. Yeah, it's also not very portable because that's actually like 4 RUs or so. So, that's not really an easy backpack carrying item, but, hey, if your boss comes to you and says, we have $100,000 to spend, or we're going to form a TSCM program, and I'm estimating it'll take about $200,000, what should we buy? pick up some of those. Yeah, a couple of them. They work better in pairs, you can tell them. Then if one happens to go missing and just ends up at your house, I mean, who knows? Yeah. The next thing you're going to look at hardware-wise are antennas. A good antenna can make the difference between hearing a signal and missing a signal. So this is one area where it's worth spending some money on. The flexible rubber duck antennas that come with a lot of the radios are so-so, but can be helpful just because you're not going to easily poke your eye out with them or other people's. They can also be great for when you want to have them on your body. They're not going to be poking you and stuff like that. But also get a good cheap telescoping whip antenna. These are nice because you can easily tune them basically depending on the frequency you want to use. If I want to monitor something into like 40 megahertz range, I'd have it all the way extended. Like 800, you don't want to collapse it down. So it's an easy way to kind of tune the antenna to the frequency range you want to listen to and get a lot of, see a definite increase in performance. If you're going to be doing any sort of work inside a vehicle, get a mag mount antenna. Another cheap option, this is a little guy from Radio Shack, has some suction cups. You can stick it to the outside of the car, run the cable inside, use your existing antennas. And it's once you get the RF outside the vehicle, you'll see a great increase in performance. Kind of like when you're war driving, if you have a mag mount antenna on top of your vehicle versus the laptop sitting in your passenger seat, the range increases are substantial. Same thing here. The final is consider getting frequency-specific antennas. The big one I love to use is the Max System 800 megahertz discone. This was basically designed specifically to monitor 800, 900 megahertz frequencies. It's actually pretty funny when you get it. It includes a frequency list of all the cell phone frequencies for the old analog system with like a warning, do not monitor these, but it was, very clearly marketed towards that. You're like, yes, you can listen to those phone calls that you're not supposed to listen to, and then you get it, you open up the box, and the only piece of paper is like all the cordless or cell phone frequencies. But great little antenna. Only downside, it's a little hard to travel with, but it's small. And will really pull out 900 megahertz frequencies from a distance. Using the Max System antenna on a mag mount, wireless headsets that usually you can only hear inside the building, I've been able to pick up like 2 or 3 blocks away from a building. So you can really increase some range, and that can also help demonstrate to the client. The client might go, well, who cares? I have these wireless headsets, but only, you can't hear them from that far away. These things stop working if I get 10 feet from my desk. So, no one can actually hear me from far away. But if you actually go, well, we travel 3 blocks away and I'm still able to listen to your phone calls, that can kind of help drive home the point a little bit. Other random accessories, again, Scout, highly, highly recommended. Next is some recording equipment. If it's in the rules of engagement and legal, record conversations you have. That can be a great way to demonstrate to your client or management what sort of information you heard. Next up are cameras, doing on-site profiling. It's great to be able to take pictures of the radios to compare later on. Next one is a DTMF decoder. DTMF tones are the tones you hear when you press the buttons on a phone. And the final is a video converter. Again, you'll generally need a radio with an IF output, which is going to be a higher-end radio, usually in the 500 on up range, but can be helpful if they have video on site to be able to decode it. So with that, we'll get into some real-world examples. How I've actually used this on penetration tests. First scenario, we're doing a physical penetration test of a casino. We started out with off-site profiling and basically looked up the casino name with a various things inside Google and found out the frequency of their radio link between the casino and the state police. Got on site, we started monitoring this link, found that it was definitely them, and found a couple interesting things. First thing is the casino dispatcher and the police dispatcher were actually pretty chatty, especially after hours when it got to be like third shift and there really wasn't much else going on. So through that, I was actually able to figure out the names of the first and third shift dispatchers. Doesn't seem like much, but is very valuable information from a social engineering point of view. Imagine being able to go up to the guard at the gate and say, oh yeah, when I was here last night talking with Mary, she just said I could just come right in, I didn't need to get signed in because I'll just be here for a minute. And he's like, oh, you know the dispatcher, yeah, go ahead. Great ways to be able to get in, get information. Also handy if you are doing a physical penetration test to monitor these links, because if a call goes out about an intrusion and they're asking for the state police to come and help out, that would probably be the time to either leave or give up before, the guys with guns that, well, most casinos have guns anyways, but, basically before the cavalry rides up, because the casino police security are probably going to be far more understanding when their boss comes down and says, no, they're supposed to be here. But, when the state police show up and, your contact on state goes, oh, no, they're supposed to be here. And they're like, yeah, well, we now have, 20 cop cars in the parking lot surrounding it, so we have a problem. So it's good to monitor these things just in case things go horribly, horribly wrong. Next up, once we were on site, visually inspected the radios, got some pictures of them, saw what they appeared to be HT Pro series, most likely the GP 338 series. Looked on BAT Labs, found out that they operate in these 4 frequency ranges. Noted the antennas they were using were about yay tall, so most likely they're in the 400 megahertz range, possibly the 100 megahertz range, but definitely not the 29 or the 35. So already I've narrowed it down to here are 2 possible ranges. And then finally carried the Scout through the casino, was able to hang out in the gaming room floor, go through the hotel part of the casino, and record all the frequencies that are in use. One note when you're on a casino floor with any sort of radio equipment, make sure it is well hidden, because if they see it, you will most likely get slammed up against a wall and have all sorts of strange questions asked of you. You hopefully have a get out jail free card you can pull out if you can get to your wallet. But they, casino security really dislikes any sort of radio gear anywhere near the casino floor. So just make sure it's well hidden. So the next step. Went back to the car, pulled the frequencies off the Scout, noted those in the ranges I suspected the radios worked in, started monitoring those. Found ones that were definitely the casino security, and what do we hear? We heard some general chatter, guard rotations, signing in for rotations, guards going on and off shift, that type of thing. So what can we learn from this? We can learn a couple of valuable things. We're going to learn lingo. We can figure out what they're calling the back areas. That can, again, be helpful for social engineering. If you say, yeah, Kevin at the front gate, sent me to the whatever area, sent me to the, the dungeon. And, they're like, oh, okay, yeah. And that ends up being, the money pit where they keep all the money. They know, that lingo. They don't think anyone else will know it. So if you can drop, one of the guards' names, a supervisor's name, as well as some internal lingo, it can be really helpful for social engineering. Again, learn guard names, figured out when shift changes were, so that can be helpful because there could be blind spots when one person's going off shift and the other person's coming on shift. Also learned the schedule and rotation of when the guards are roaming around. Again, very handy if you're doing a physical penetration test and you want to go in through this gate and the roaming guard is now on the other side of the building, less chance will be detected. Furthermore, we actually had a different site we're doing some work on. They had a variety of gates, and trying to figure out which one we wanted to go through. Had our eyes on the back gate because it was fairly poorly protected. There wasn't actually any sort of swipe card. It was basically just a guard standing there that would, flag people down to show them their ID when they're going through. So we figured that would probably be the easiest one to go through. So we're listening to the guard frequencies. Ends up that guard that day really, really needed to use the bathroom. So like every 5 minutes, he'd be like, rear gate, need to use the bathroom. You're like, we'll get someone over there. And then, a couple minutes later, yeah, rear gate, really need to use the bathroom. Can you please get somebody over here? And after about a half an hour of this, finally the dispatcher just said, we can't get anyone to come in. Just go use the bathroom and get back there as fast as you can. Bingo. We now know that, we sat there, watched as, as soon as the guard left was out of sight, just pulled right in. We're now onto the facility ground. By the time the guard came back from the bathroom, we were already penetrated their perimeter. So it's, kind of, those are freebies. But you can learn valuable information like that as well if you're listening. Next case study. This case was an internal pen test against a fairly large insurance provider. Notice when it's being escorted through the building that they were using a large number of wireless headsets. So I requested to add the headsets into the scope of the engagement, specifically to monitor the telephone conversations that are taking place over those headsets. Once we redid the rules of engagement, had all the lawyer stuff involved, got permission, and proceeded to then start looking at what sort of things are being transmitted. Fired up the scanner, started scanning through these ranges. Actually used this little guy here. This is a radio I prefer to use. It's a VX5R, it's amateur radio. So if you're an amateur radio operator, you probably don't need tips on buying a radio because you're already a geek like I am in this. But powered up this little guy, started searching through, found several dozen headsets transmitting in that range, all of them analog. And then proceeded to use signal strength information as well as some geographic information by going around outside to try to figure out which headsets were inside the facility. Because this was in a downtown urban environment, and so I'm not breaking the law or going outside the rules of engagement. It was really important to take that step to make sure I was only listening to headsets that were owned by the client that I was given permission to listen to. Once I figured that out, started monitoring. So what I heard a lot of phone calls. Specifically, heard a lot of calls to their help desk. Heard employees checking voicemail. And the other really cool thing about these headsets, like the one pictured over there, you can hear conversations even when the phone's hung up. Most of these headsets continue to transmit even when the phone is hung up if the headset is still on. So you basically just, you have a room bug. And when you consider most of the time the people that have these headsets, you're talking about executives or their administrative assistants, corporate espionage, oh my God, these are a wet dream. It's awesome. All sorts of information, in terms of, mergers, acquisitions, crazy stuff can be heard through them. And it's amazing how sensitive these things are. It seems like when you're on the phone, you're always trying to adjust it. I don't know, when you put it on the bass, it seems like it changes the microphone because you can just about hear everything in the room with a lot of them. So something to keep in mind if you do use analog headsets like this in your business, it's not just your telephone calls that could be at risk. It could be any conversation that's taking place around the headset. So, I was able to get some juicy information there. Specifically, what do we hear? Well, it comes to find out that the part of the help desk that used the wireless headsets were the 4 people that were responsible for password resets, which was awesome because someone would call up, oh, I lost my password. I forgot it. Okay, what's your social security number? Great. What's your login ID? Great. All sorts of other information. Then they'd reset their password. So, we could sit there and then instantly, we now have a login into the domain. And even if you, basically a race condition, if you get in first before they do, even if you reset their password, they're like, yeah, it didn't work. They're like, okay, let's try it again. But once you have the token established, inside Windows, for the most part, that token is going to be valid for a certain time period. You can start, pillaging around, looking for things. Most likely, you're not going to get a domain admin this way, but you're going to get a normal user that can get you logged into the domain, which is a great first step. Conversely, we were able to actually hear these folks from about 3 blocks away, and actually did some testing with their Citrix and OWA that was internet-facing, where we'd sit there listening to somebody, and their Citrix only used single-factor authentication, their password. And because of this, they switched over to dual-factor authentication because we were able to sit out there, username, password, log into their Citrix box, and we're on their internal network, from listening to their phone calls while disconnected from their corporate LAN. So, all sorts of valuable information. Additionally, the voicemail passwords with the headsets, even when you push the keypads on the phone, or like in this case, this headset actually has one, you send the DTMF tones over the air. If you have a DTMF decoder, you can then pull out those tones, figure out what numbers they are, and you now have their voicemail password. So depending on if it's an executive assistant, whoever, you can now get access to those person's voicemail. For the pen testing point of view, the passwords are really the juicy item. But if your client's worried about corporate espionage or any sort of thing like that, the other information that can be gained is astronomical. I've known about mergers and acquisitions for large organizations before they were public, because when I was on a client site, listening to stuff like this, heard executives talking about this type of stuff. And it's not beyond the realm of disbelief that their competitors are saying they're listening to them. Just the simple fact that a Fortune 200 company that is very conscientious of cost would spend a couple $100,000 to have people follow around sweep for bugs, might imply we actually found stuff and that people are actually trying to listen to us. So corporate espionage does exist, and things like this just make their job really easy. So what sort of stuff's on the horizon? I'm starting to see a lot of VoIP-enabled radio systems. I was at a university talking with them, and they were just raving about this new dispatch system they got. They're like, it's awesome. We have our dispatcher anywhere on the network. She can plug in her laptop, and she can start dispatching calls. It's great. And I'm like, oh, dear God. Start checking, and they didn't limited down to anywhere on the network. So anywhere on, this fairly open network, it wasn't even like a student side or a faculty side of the network, it was any part of this campus network, even through Wi-Fi, they could plug in and start dispatching calls. They looked at it as a good thing, which it could be in some regards, because if their command center is taken over, there's some sort of disaster, they can relocate it anywhere and be up and running in 5 minutes, which is great, but you really need to make sure it's secure. How's that transmission going over the network? What's the authentication into it? Because a lot of these people that make the radio systems really do not understand IP security. They're like, well, it was secure going over a phone line, so we can just have that same level of security as it's sitting on the corporate network, I've actually had vendors where I start poking at their products and say, well, we don't really think we need to fix that because this would be behind a firewall on your network, so that's what's protecting it is your corporate firewall. And like, if your client isn't using a firewall, we can't protect against that. I was like, well, what about a malicious insider? I'm like, never really thought about that. So some, interesting stuff that's coming up there. Next up is software-defined radios. This is one area I really want to get more involved with. That is the GNU radio, the GU-RP. And basically, it's a software-defined radio. You can load your own code into it. And it's being used a lot for monitoring various digital transmissions. Bluetooth, DECT, which is actually, DECT is the major protocol used by digital headsets and digital phones, very popular in Europe. In the US, they recently approved the DECT standard a couple years ago, but even before then, vendors were using a kind of a bastardized version of DECT that's supposedly encrypted. That was totally blown out of the water at the CCC conference earlier this year. So now DECT headsets may not be as secure either. So I suspect over the next few years, with the digital radios coming in, we'll see a lot more software-defined radio attacks that can decode them. So some quick defenses. First, test your own equipment. Make sure your headsets and cordless phones are secure. Check your facility for unencrypted radio traffic. Follow this method. Be sure your headsets are encrypted, your cordless phones are encrypted. Note that DECT may not actually count as encryption. If you do have a guard force, consider switching to a digital or encrypted radio. Note, I say consider. The real key with the guards is to train them to be aware what they say over the radio is public. Because frankly, if your company makes toilet paper for giraffes, you probably don't need to install a super high-end encrypted radio system. You just need to train your guards to be aware of what they're saying. You're a nuclear power plant or a casino, probably want to look at something like encrypted radio traffic. And it's especially key in any case to make sure the guards are aware what they say over the radio is public. It's amazing the stuff I've heard over the radio in terms of profanity, racial slurs, all sorts of stuff that if that were to reach the local media would be a huge reputational risk to the company. So kind of another just education area there of not really a physical security or electronic security, but again, another risk to the company. They just need to be aware, what you see over the radio, anyone can listen in on. So with that, in summary, all your RF belong to us. During your next pen test, pick up a scanner, go through these steps, see what you can hear. And remember to launch all SIGs for great security justice. Listen to us on iTunes and at securityjustice.com. And with that, I'll go over to questions. For more information, you can go to securestate.com, which is my employer. If you need help with these services, we obviously offer them. And then there's my blog. The blog is where I kind of work out some of these ideas. Then eventually they're rolled up in the white papers that are put onto the Secure State site. So you can kind of follow the work as it goes along on my blog. Then the official white papers are done. They'll appear on the site. Right now I'm doing a series of mag chip analysis for pen testers. After that, I'll dig into radio reconnaissance, also doing some stuff with DECT headsets in the US. So with that, I'll open up to questions.
Never hear anything about the Sprint cards and the Verizon cards for your laptops. What's the issues there?
For the most part, those tend to be fairly safe because fairly safe. They go over the actual PCS network of some sort, so they usually have encryption enabled. The real danger there I see is you still want to use a VPN because once it hits the Sprint network, Sprint employees still have access to it, Verizon employees still have access to it, but the chances of someone sitting down and monitoring the transmissions wirelessly are pretty low. But there are some GNU radio projects that are specifically looking at GSM, so like T-Mobile and AT&T. and being able to decode that traffic. So for that, I mean, in summary, probably not going to be able to monitor on the RF side, but once it hits the Sprint or Verizon network, they have full access to it, so still want to use encryption. Yes?
Do you recommend a good, low-cost, multi-band spectrum analyzer?
Good low-cost multiband spectrum analyzer. Avcom, I mean, you're still talking like $2,000. So it depends what you mean by low cost. You know, in terms of spectrum analyzers, that's low cost because when I did TSCM work, you know, a $50,000 spectrum analyzer was kind of low cost. But Avcom does some. If you go to grovent.com, they have some good equipment there. But yeah, you're still talking about fairly expensive stuff. A while back, Monitoring Times did a series of articles on building a spectrum analyzer, and I've been trying to find those schematics because I like to build one. But yeah, that's haven't been able to find that yet. No. For the most part, I haven't played around. When I've used spectrum analyzers, it's more in the TSCM work, and we had a really big budget. Since then, I haven't really had a need to use it since I got out of that. Yes?
For that low-end Bearcat scanner that you were showing,
Yeah.
does that actually have the cell frequencies unlocked, or do you have to buy for that?
For a low-end Bearcat scanner that I had up earlier, does it actually have the cell frequencies, and are they unlocked? Can they be unlocked? They do not have the cell frequencies. All the radios up there, if you buy them through normal means, will not be unlocked. One note of that is the AROs. If you investigate the FCC rules regarding who can purchase those equipment, that is, has the cell phones unblocked, there are provisions for corporations to purchase them as test equipment. So if you claim you're doing a TSCM team, you can usually purchase that equipment legally by just basically filling out some paperwork. If you contact Grovent, which is the company I've worked with, they can step you through that process and what paperwork you need to provide. The other option is just to buy them from Europe, but and then you know that'd be bad and illegal. But any scanner that's made today is required that you have to actually change the CPU to unlock the radio. You know, it's not like an old-time radio where you can just clip a couple of resistors in it and get the cell band. But the other note is the analog cell band is no longer being used. That network was decommissioned last year. So there's not much in there right now. But if you do want to get it, check into there are ways for corporations to legally purchase that stuff as test equipment. Yeah, they're the folks that make Monitoring Times is the magazine. Grovent and then AES Ham is another big one I've worked with. But the Grove folks are super friendly. They have pretty decent prices. And we'll, you know, step you through the mix. You know, if you ask politely about, you know, we need to get some test equipment that can do this, they can help you out. Yes. How hard is it, and what's the challenge in decoding the digital signals? Depends what digital signals. For stuff like APCO25, which is the big digital signal used by a lot of police and fire, that's built into some scanners, so it's just buying a $500 scanner. For the other ones, the big challenge is getting the codec that works for it. And basically, it's like, you know, Real Player or any, you know, QuickTime, you need the right codec to be able to decode the audio. With the GNU Radio project, there are lots of folks that are working on getting those codecs and decoding them. So that would be the best place to look. But anything outside of APCO25 is going to be in the experimental stage right now. There's some stuff being done with DECT as well. Additionally, even if someone's using APCO25, like Cleveland uses APCO25 for their police, but they're using a different vocoder than the normal one, so you can't actually receive it. Another option in those cases, if you have a target that's, you know, you really want to spend the money and you know they're using Motorola Sabre radios, for instance, you can buy those radios off of eBay for usually cheap. And then if you find a Motorola tech, they can usually program it up for you to work on those frequencies. And that's where being a ham radio operator can be really handy, because most of the Motorola techs in the area are also ham radio operators. So you can go to them, they'll have the programming cables, the software. You know, you might even be able to find the tech that actually built the system and can say, tell you what, I'll program you up a radio that won't allow you to transmit, but has all the keys. You know, so that's the other route to go. But for the most part, you're talking about very custom stuff. Any other questions? Okay, if anybody does, you know, feel free to contact me through the website or, you know, find the guy in the kilt. Utilikilled. Complete with barcode. I didn't even need to use my Shmoocon defense system. Thanks, man. Yeah. If,
The only reason you didn't need the defense system is he has no aims. Yeah. See, I brought him a ball throw.
Yeah, if you could take the antenna off that, it just kind of twists off.
Oh, you could actually see me, couldn't you?
Man, you know our physical kit we have.
I don't believe so.
I think for monitoring wireless cameras.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to kind of bring that, but you know, Melvin had it
You should have told me.
because he needed something to transport some forensics drives in, so he decided just to take the physical kit and use that instead.
Not 100%.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a fencing helmet.
Yes, it is. To get out of this guy's way, because someone carried this. Yeah. You're comfortable with that? No.
Is it gone? Better than it was yesterday.
Whoa.
Oop.
Not feeling
Yeah, if you get the water.
for sure.
Although bending down next to a guy in a kilt can be bad.
Yeah, I'll keep it open because it's running, so it gets a little. Yeah, and that is mine. Water. It's a metal water bottle.
Good job, babe.
Thanks. Thanks. Here, now I can shut that. If you bring the laptop over, I can shut it down and get it all packed up. Nah. Yeah, that's true.
Oh, there it is.
Oh.
Sweat a little bit, man.
Just bug myself.
So, down there. Okay, we're not gonna have time for this. I'm just gonna tell him he's gonna have to live without that. Sure, do. The presentation's like 2 gigs.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some demonstration videos, so yeah, it kind of sucks. So I'm gonna cover that up and see how horrible this works out. This thing messes up every time I do a talk. There's always some strange ass shit, and I have to.
Are you the only one speaking?
No, Sean went to go smoke. That seems to be okay, huh?
Bring up, if you want to adjust that, bring up your, yeah.
What is the max resolution that this supports?
I do not know. I know 1024 works. Well, it is 10.
Alright, good enough for me. It's fine. That's actually the fastest that's ever, like, auto-detected. somebody's way taller than I am. Me and Sean are short, so. I guess if we get this one hot.
We've also got this one, I think.
I'm not quite sure.
Find out.
I don't mind holding a mic if Sean wants to use that one. You might want to ask him, but there he is. The card isn't working. Oh, thank you very much. The card isn't working, so we're gonna have to deal without it. The only thing, yeah, I think that's a little messed up, but I think it's tilted down too far because this one's fine. But it's cutting off the Shmoocon logo a little bit. I want to raise the little pegs. Got a couple minutes. Got about 3 minutes, I guess.
So we got one sit down mic.
You can use that if you want, but yeah, but I would be leery of. No, we're good.
No. Turn it on to make sure. Anything you guys
Plus, I don't believe in patching boxes. I don't want anybody owning me.
This is an updated black hat one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some new stuff. So some of the same stuff that hopefully is.
So we actually, for you two guys right there.
Oh, they're on. Well, no, I'm gonna say it over the mic.
Say it over the mic.
Yeah.
That's cool. Is it a 2.0 or a 1.0? It's the 2? I'll take it. That works. I'll make sure I try hard on this race.
Which won't be hard with the plastic back.
Not hard to do.
I keep shoving it in my back pocket, and I don't know if it's my ass breaking it or what the hell's happening with it, but it doesn't seem to be too durable. Oh. hopefully they start pretty soon because we're gonna run out of time really quick. As it is right now. Oh, it's actually, yeah. Hopefully we'll cut a little bit of time out of Q&A by taking questions on Twitter. It's like, it'd be like one of the only talks where we actually play on the phones while doing that. That sucks. Okay. I guess we're waiting for the video to start up, but to do something a little different, if you have Twitter, since this is a social networking presentation, if you have Twitter up, our Twitter names are basically Twitter / our names with no spaces. If you want to ask questions via Twitter, that might be a good way to do it, and that way we can read back the question and answer. Just a thought.
You gotta last, your Shmoocons have to last all weekend, so you can just use Twitter now, save those for later.
Are there any MySpace employees here or Fox News of the lawyer persuasion? Because if there is, this is the same fail that you've already experienced, so you need not worry about that fail. Did anybody see our talk at Black Hat this year or DEF CON? Anybody? A couple people?
that's good.
Cool.
That's good.
There is updates, so it's not the exact same crap.
Okay. I got a couple of things to give away as well. I've got a folio padded. I think it's got a Shmoocon logo on it. Anybody? And I also have an RFID protecting wallet.
Oh.
Nice catch.
So, okay, great. We'll start in a moment.
Got like 3 of these, so.
Yeah.